You've been told to go silent, that if you stop texting, stop calling, stop chasing, she will magically miss you. But what if I told you the silence you're relying on is the very reason she feels nothing? What if your silence isn't power, but proof that you were never valuable in the first place? This is where men get it wrong. And today I'm going to break down exactly why your silence isn't making her miss you and what you need to do instead. When men first hear about the no contact rule or the strategy of going silent, they think it's a magic bullet. They assume that if they stop texting, stop calling, and completely disappear, the woman will instantly start missing them and chasing after them. But here's the reality that most men don't want to face. Silence without value is meaningless. It is just noise, an empty gesture that holds no weight in her mind. If you never left a deep impression on her while you were present, she has nothing to recall when you're gone. This is why so many men end up confused and heartbroken when their silence is met with her indifference. They expect her to ache with longing, but instead she just moves on because silence in itself does not create value. It only amplifies the value that was already there. Think about it like this. If a powerful leader suddenly disappears from a room, everyone notices. People ask, where did he go? Because his presence was commanding, his energy undeniable. But if someone who was invisible in the first place quietly slips away, nobody even realizes they're gone. The same principle applies in relationships. If you were a man who carried impact, whose presence made her feel emotions she couldn't ignore, then your silence will feel like a void. She will feel the absence because she was attached to the presence. But if you were constantly chasing, begging, or overgiving without ever establishing real respect, then your silence is not a void. It is a relief. She doesn't feel deprived. She feels freed from a weight she didn't want in the first place. Men often underestimate how brutally honest a woman's psychology can be. If she didn't feel attraction, respect, or admiration while you were present, she won't start creating those feelings in your absence. Instead, she will rationalize your silence as proof that the connection was never strong to begin with. She may even see it as immaturity or weakness if it comes across as a tactic. This is why the strategy of going silent backfires for so many men. They think silence is creating mystery, when in reality, it is just exposing the lack of value they carried in her life. Mystery only works if she already cares about the answer. If she never cared in the first place, she won't go looking. Value is not built by doing nothing. It is built by who you are and how you show up. Your character, your growth, your purpose, your ability to create emotional impact. These are the things that determine whether silence feels powerful or powerless. A man who knows his worth can step back, and his absence is immediately felt because his presence was never taken for granted. But a man who never established that worth cannot suddenly disappear and expect magic to happen. In fact, his silence often confirms what she already felt, that he was not essential, that he was easy to forget, that he brought nothing unique to her life. This is why silence must be backed by substance. It is not the act of withholding that makes her miss you. It is the quality of what you gave before withdrawing. If she felt secure, challenged, inspired, or deeply connected when you were present, then your silence triggers contrast. It forces her to recognize the gap between what she had and what she lost. But if your presence never stood out, then your silence is not contrast, it is continuation. She keeps living her life uninterrupted because you were never a meaningful part of it in the first place. The men who use silence effectively are not playing games. They are living with purpose. Their silence is not a manipulation. It is a reflection of their discipline, their self-control, and their focus on things bigger than chasing validation. Women feel this difference. They know when a man's silence comes from strength and when it comes from insecurity. And the ones who carry true value in her eyes are the ones whose silence echoes because their presence was never ordinary. One of the biggest reasons why silence fails to make a woman miss you is because, in truth, her attention was never earned in the first place. Many men go silent as a tactic, thinking that by pulling away, they will suddenly activate some hidden desire in her heart. But what they overlook is that desire has to exist before absence can amplify it. If a woman never truly invested in you emotionally, mentally, or even physically, then your silence is not a disruption to her. It is simply the natural state of how little she cared to begin with. You cannot withdraw what you never deposited. You cannot expect a reaction when the connection itself was never solid. When you were around, what did she feel? Did she feel excitement? Did she feel admiration? Did she feel a sense of respect that made her view you as a man of worth? Or did she feel nothing but the weight of constant validation seeking, endless texting, and emotional neediness? Many men think their effort was enough to earn her attention, but effort without impact is like shouting into the wind, loud but never landing anywhere. If all she ever experienced was your desperation, then what exactly is she supposed to miss when you go silent? You may have been present, but you were never significant. And when significance is missing, absence does not create longing, it creates indifference. Men who misunderstand this point often live in a cycle of disappointment. They cling hard when she's slipping away. They finally hear the advice to go no contact, and they retreat into silence, hoping that it will reverse the situation. But silence is not a magic spell. If you didn't establish value, then the moment you step back, she feels no loss. She simply continues living as though nothing has changed, because from her perspective, nothing of substance was ever there. She cannot miss a presence that never left a deep impression. This is why you see men complaining, "I haven't texted her for weeks and she hasn't even noticed." Of course she hasn't, because she didn't attach her emotions to you in the first place. Women only miss men who create impact. Impact is not created by chasing endlessly, by over-explaining your worth, or by trying to buy her love with gifts and constant attention. Impact is created by being a man who is grounded, decisive, and certain of himself. It's created by living a life so filled with purpose and confidence that your presence naturally draws her in. When you've established that foundation, silence becomes powerful because it pulls away something she had grown to value. But when you never built that foundation, silence exposes the truth. She was never invested enough to care. The deeper psychology here is simple. Human beings long for things that have proven valuable to them. When you lose access to something meaningful, your mind replays the moments, the feelings, and the memories that made it matter. That is what generates longing. But if no memories of value were created, then silence is not a trigger. It is background noise. This is why it is so crucial for men to focus on who they are while they are present, instead of relying on absence as a manipulation. Presence is where impact is made. Presence is where respect is earned. Without that, silence has no foundation. When a man assumes that silence alone will make her miss him, he is trying to skip the hard work of becoming unforgettable. He wants the effect without the cause. He wants the reward without planting the seed. But relationships and attraction don't work like that. A woman doesn't miss you because you disappeared. She misses you because your presence left something in her soul that no one else gave her. If that wasn't established, then silence is nothing more than a pause in your pursuit, one she may not even notice. One of the biggest mistakes men make when they go silent is believing that women only notice the action itself and not the intention behind it. What they fail to understand is that women are incredibly intuitive creatures. They don't just look at what you do, they feel why you do it. This is why silence on its own doesn't always work. If a man withdraws out of strength, purpose, and confidence, the silence feels powerful and even attractive. But if a man withdraws out of insecurity, fear of rejection, or as a manipulative game, she senses it immediately, and the silence loses its impact. It is not just the act of being silent that matters. It is the energy behind that silence that makes the difference. When a woman can feel that your silence comes from a place of weakness, she interprets it as avoidance rather than authority. Instead of respecting you for having boundaries, she feels you are sulking, pouting, or trying to force her hand emotionally. She doesn't view that as masculine strength. She sees it as childish behavior. Women do not chase after men who seem emotionally weak or manipulative. In fact, when your silence feels like a trick rather than a natural expression of your self-respect, she resents it instead of missing you. What you thought would build attraction instead destroys it, because your silence reveals the insecurity you were trying to hide. On the other hand, when silence is used by a man who truly understands his worth, it communicates something completely different. It says, I don't need to force myself into your attention. I don't need to over-explain myself or compete for validation. I am focused on myself, and my life is full whether you notice or not. That kind of silence is attractive because it feels authentic. It comes from a man who isn't trying to manipulate her emotions, but simply living from a place of dignity and control. A woman may not consciously think this through, but she feels it. She feels the difference between silence that is born of strength and silence that is born of fear. This is why two men can both go silent, and yet their results are completely different. One disappears and she completely forgets about him, while the other disappears and she finds herself wondering about him, replaying memories, questioning her decisions, and feeling a pull to reconnect. The difference isn't in the silence, it's in the intent behind it. The first man went silent, hoping to be missed, broadcasting his insecurity through absence. The second man went silent because he had real things to focus on, broadcasting his self-worth and his discipline through his absence. Women don't just notice the action, they notice the motive. Men need to understand that women are constantly reading between the lines. Every interaction, every word, every silence is being interpreted through the lens of intent. When you send her multiple texts, she knows if it's genuine excitement or desperation. When you stay calm in conflict, she knows if it's discipline or emotional suppression. And when you go silent, she knows if it's confidence or fear. This means that silence, far from being a universal strategy, is only as effective as the man behind it. A weak man's silence is just another symptom of his weakness. A strong man's silence is another demonstration of his strength. What makes this dynamic even more powerful is that women don't consciously process it in logical steps. They feel it emotionally. They can't always explain why one man's silence makes them feel irritated, while another man's silence makes them feel intrigued. They just know. That intuition is what makes silence such a double-edged sword. It can elevate you if used from the right mindset, or expose you if used from the wrong one. Silence, in other words, doesn't hide your intent, it amplifies it. If you're confident and self-respecting, silence highlights that. If you're insecure and manipulative, silence highlights that even more. This is why men who treat silence like a trick almost always fail. They believe they're playing chess while she's playing checkers. But the reality is that women have already mastered this game at a level most men cannot comprehend. They have spent their lives reading between the lines, noticing subtleties, and analyzing intent. A woman can sense whether your silence comes from calm control or from emotional chaos. And once she interprets your silence correctly, she responds not to the action itself, but to the intent she perceives behind it. One of the harshest realities that men refuse to accept is that when they go silent, most women don't sit around endlessly replaying memories and longing for their return. Instead, they fill that empty space with something else. This is the part men rarely think through. They assume their absence will create a vacuum so strong that she will be forced to feel the weight of it and come back running. But human nature doesn't work like that. When there's a gap, people fill it. When there's silence, people replace it with noise. And when a man disappears without having created deep emotional value, a woman doesn't experience it as a painful void. She simply redirects her energy elsewhere. That something else can take many forms. Sometimes it's her career, her friendships, or her hobbies. She distracts herself with things that give her a sense of fulfillment and remind her that life goes on with or without you. Other times, and this is where it stings, she fills the void with another man. Women are rarely without options. While you're sitting in silence, waiting for her to text, wondering if she's missing you, she may already have someone else reaching out, giving her the attention you assumed she'd crave from you. The truth is, silence doesn't automatically create longing, it creates space. And whoever steps into that space is the one who captures her attention. This is why men who rely solely on silence often end up crushed by the outcome. They wait, hoping she will notice their absence, but instead she moves forward, emotionally investing in something new. By the time they decide to reappear, the void they thought they left has already been filled. She no longer feels the pull because she has replaced what was once their connection with a new habit, a new source of validation, or a new emotional bond. This is the danger of assuming that silence is enough. It ignores the reality that people adapt quickly, and women especially are not wired to stay stuck for long when they feel unwanted attention or lack of presence. Another layer to this truth is that women are masters at emotional redirection. Even if she does feel your absence, she will not allow herself to sit in that pain for too long. She will naturally turn her focus towards something that soothes the discomfort. If you are not deeply rooted in her heart, that redirection happens swiftly. She may convince herself that she's better off without you, that her time is better spent on self-improvement, or that she deserves someone who doesn't make her feel abandoned. And the longer she reinforces those thoughts while you stay silent, the stronger the new narrative becomes. What you believed would make her miss you often becomes the exact fuel she uses to move further away from you. What makes this even more devastating is that many men confuse her silence in response with her secretly missing them. They misinterpret her lack of communication as her struggling to cope with the absence, when in reality, she may already be filling her days with new experiences, new people, and new opportunities. Women rarely broadcast their redirection. They quietly shift until the man who went silent realizes he has been replaced. This is why silence without value is such a risky move, because instead of making her chase, it often gives her the perfect opening to forget. At its core, the belief that silence makes her miss you assumes that you were irreplaceable. But if you never established yourself as a man of deep impact and significance, then you were not a void in her life. You were just an option, and options are easily replaced. She doesn't need to wait for your return when she has a world of alternatives that can occupy her time and emotions. This is the brutal truth men have to face. Your silence does not guarantee her reflection. In fact, in most cases, it guarantees her replacement. What most men fail to realize is that silence by itself is not what makes a woman stop and think. It's what you are doing in that silence that truly matters. Growth speaks louder than silence because silence without transformation is just emptiness, but silence backed by visible progress becomes undeniable. A man who disappears and comes back the same has no impact, but a man who withdraws into his own world, focuses on his mission, builds himself mentally, physically, and emotionally, and then reemerges stronger, forces her to notice the difference. She may not miss the quiet you left behind, but she will feel the shift when she sees the man you've become. When you go silent, the natural assumption she makes depends on who you are. If you were weak and dependent before, she assumes you're sulking. If you were needy, she assumes you're playing games. But if she witnesses growth, if she sees you advancing in your career, improving your body, developing your confidence, and building a lifestyle that radiates purpose, her mind cannot ignore it. Silence alone does not change the story, but growth rewrites the entire narrative. She stops seeing you as the man who was easy to dismiss and starts recognizing you as someone who carries weight, someone she underestimated, someone whose absence was not empty space, but preparation for transformation. Growth is powerful because it creates contrast. Human beings only feel longing when they sense a difference between what was and what is. If you remain the same during silence, there is no contrast, no reason for her to revisit her feelings. But when she sees the man who once clung to her, now walking with purpose and independence, when she sees the one who once begged for her time, now commanding his own world, when she sees the one who once doubted himself, now radiating self-assurance, that contrast forces her to rethink her assumptions. It isn't the silence she feels, it's the undeniable change that silence produced. Women are deeply sensitive to momentum. They are drawn to men who are in motion, men who are not stagnant, men who are constantly evolving. If she looks at you and sees no progress, she feels no spark. But when she sees you leveling up, it naturally stirs curiosity, admiration, and even regret. She wonders how you manage to detach from her and still thrive. She questions why you no longer orbit around her the way you used to. And in that questioning, she begins to feel the pull of attraction again, not because you went silent, but because your silence turned into fuel for your growth. The mistake most men make is using silence as a waiting game. They sit still, do nothing, and count the days until she reaches out. But that stagnation only confirms her decision to walk away. Silence should not be about waiting. It should be about working. It should be the space where you sharpen your mind, refine your goals, and elevate your entire identity. The man who emerges from silence unchanged has wasted the opportunity. But the man who uses silence as his incubation period becomes someone impossible to ignore. Growth gives meaning to your absence, and that meaning is what creates desire. This is also why silence backed by growth never feels like a tactic. It doesn't carry the energy of manipulation because it isn't about making her miss you. It's about making yourself undeniable. And when you do that, missing you becomes a natural byproduct. You don't force it. You don't chase it. You don't demand it. She feels it because she sees with her own eyes that your life has moved forward, that you have advanced in ways she didn't expect, and that you no longer need her validation to define your worth. That realization shakes her more than silence ever could. Growth, therefore, is what transforms silence from emptiness into impact. A man who evolves during his absence sends the clearest message without saying a word, that his life is progressing with or without her. And that message cuts deeper than any silent treatment could, because it forces her to confront the possibility that she let go of someone who is no longer the same man she walked away from. The final truth that most men overlook is that real power is never in complete silence or constant chasing. It is in controlled presence. Presence is what creates the bond, the memories, and the emotions that a woman attaches herself to. But presence without control becomes suffocating, and absence without impact becomes irrelevant. The men who truly hold influence over women are not the ones who vanish completely and hope to be remembered, nor the ones who hover constantly and beg for validation. They are the men who know how to show up with intensity, authenticity, and strength, and then step back with dignity. It is that balance, the art of controlled presence, that leaves the deepest imprint. Controlled presence means you are not always available, but when you are, your energy is undeniable. You create moments where she feels your value, where she experiences the weight of your masculinity, your purpose, and your grounded energy. In those moments, she feels something unique that she doesn't feel with anyone else. And then, when you step back, she doesn't feel neglected. She feels the contrast. That contrast is what makes her think about you when you're not there. If your presence is weak, your absence means nothing. But if your presence is strong and controlled, your absence becomes a reminder of what she had and what she risks losing. The problem with men who misunderstand silence is that they think the absence alone is enough. They disappear without ever having established their power in her life, which makes the silence hollow. But real power lies in the combination of two forces: showing up with enough strength to leave an imprint and stepping back with enough control to maintain mystery and independence. Women respect men who can strike that balance because it reflects a higher level of self-mastery. It communicates that you are not dependent on her validation, but you are also not detached to the point of irrelevance. You know how to connect, but you also know how to withdraw. That balance is what creates both attraction and respect. Controlled presence is also about timing. It's knowing when to lean in and when to pull back. It's understanding that sometimes your presence is needed to create intimacy, and other times your distance is needed to protect your self-respect. Weak men either overcommit, smothering her with constant pursuit, or they overcorrect, disappearing completely in hopes that she'll come chasing. Both extremes show a lack of awareness and emotional discipline. The powerful man, however, operates from the middle ground. He is intentional with his time, deliberate with his attention, and selective with his energy. When he gives it, it feels like a gift, not a demand. When he withholds it, it feels like strength, not punishment. That distinction is everything.